process with goals and monitoring aligned from the classroom to the boardroom. And we're moving toward that systems accreditation. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about how we've added layers and more consistent processes as we make that journey toward a system accreditation. So on this document in front of you, it's like this. We also shared in June 2024 that we are candidates for system accreditation, and you have the standards for effective schools. Our schools are always working to meet these standards, and they collect evidence of their work periodically and upload them to a common space called their School Improvement Toolkit. Our continuous improvement steering team is then analyzing this evidence and all of our data to self-assess our district prior to our external review for system accreditation, which will happen in April. Board members will participate in our visit, as will our families, schools, and our district leadership team. Schools are using evidence of engagement from the Elliott, which we'll talk about tonight. We're beginning the work of instructional rounds, which we're also going to share with you this evening, and continue going deeper with instructional coaching, ensuring that our school improvement work is making it to the classroom and that evidence from the classroom is driving our school improvement work. Another sheet of paper that you have in front of you is the Elliott tool, which has been shared with you before. And this is our K-12 measurement of engagement in the Omaha Public Schools. And we've asked each school to ensure that all teachers have at least 2 Elliott observations each year. And we're going to update you on our progress in doing those observations and how we're using the data, with some highlights from some particular schools that are doing that work really well. So we know that student engagement is perhaps the most important indicator in its relationship to others. When students are cognitively engaged in grade level work within a safe and supportive learning environment, attendance and behavior are likely to improve. Our school-based leadership teams have been using the Elliott since last year, going into classrooms together and working toward a common understanding of the ratings and evidence of engagement. Again, our district expectation is that all teachers receive at least 2 Elliots per year, and that improvement teams at the school level are using this data to understand where their work is making it to the desk of students and where their school improvement efforts are stuck. So on this screen, you can see that since last year, our district has completed over 5,000 Elliott observations in our classrooms, and then it's broken out by elementary, middle, and high, and we're working with our school-based leadership teams to use that data to, again, develop problems of practice, drive their school improvement work forward. We're using it to plan professional learning at both the school and district level, and support coaching of individual teachers, which Susan will talk with you about in a minute. This graphic shows for each of the domains on the Elliott tool that you've received what our average rating is. As schools are looking at these ratings across content areas, teacher groups, grade levels, they're able to see where they should focus their efforts. Across the board, we recognize that the domain of high expectations, which tells us whether students are cognitively engaged in grade level texts and tasks, and is an area that we need to work on alongside active learning. Those are 2 domains that many of our schools are focused on as we move forward. And so here you see the overall score, our overall average as a district across all schools and overall. And we're also able to see across the Cognia network, so all schools across the entire world that are accredited through Cognia, which includes international, large systems nationally. We can also see how we're comparing in those domains as well. One area in which you can see digital learning, that's another area that we're focusing on, the idea that students aren't just using the iPads to engage in substitution work or work with apps and so forth, but they're engaging in critical thinking alongside the grade level texts and tasks. That's an important area for us to think about as well. And as you can see, there's an interrelationship among the domains in terms of student engagement, that in order to get a higher score, to say there is evidence of the student engagement, it has to be around a worthy task, a grade level task, and we have to be using the instructional or digital tools within that supportive learning environment. So schools are also looking at the interrelationship between the data within the Elliott and then also across attendance, behavior, on track, grades, and so forth. Sure.
Looking at the elementary, what is high expectations from who? The teacher, the parents, the building, the what?
It's certainly, so I would call your attention to,
This is where it describes.
Okay. No, I this before. It's about the learners.
I think so, that's what it says.
Well, I would hope that. So that, well, we don't say parents anywhere so far, but to me that's like all of it, because in having a high expectations, you visit with the parents, you get them on board, all that sort of thing goes into that. But is that where we aren't doing well?
this tool does not measure parent engagement. This is really focused on, in the classroom, only the work that students are being asked to do by the teacher and their engagement in that work. So what was the expectation? How was it taught? And are the students engaged with it?
Where in our discussion are the parents noted in any of this tonight? Nothing about the parents? You're getting to it. Because I don't see it down here where I'm supposed to be looking. It all starts out with learners.
So the other document that you have, which I can certainly talk through with you a little bit later, this measures overall effective schools. And among these standards, our schools have to be implementing effective parent engagement and uploading and sharing evidence of that. And so certainly our schools are working hard on that, and you might see that borne out in the measurement of reducing chronic absenteeism, things of that nature. And so most certainly we are looking at parent engagement and how well our students are doing with that. This evening we were focused on the classroom piece of it, but absolutely we're collecting evidence of parent engagement aligned to these standards for effective schools. Yes. So we wanted to share some examples of how schools are using Elliott data. So it's not enough just to do thousands of observations. The importance of the work is then using that data to improve instruction and increase engagement for students. And so we wanted to highlight a few schools who are bringing some of this work together. So one example is Castelar Elementary. They are targeting the high expectations in the active learning environment because that directly relates to where they're kind of stuck or they're not seeing movement in their school improvement work. And so here you have a quote from the principal: because the Elliott is framed as learners and students rather than teacher moves, it's easy to have conversations with teachers about what the learners in their classroom are saying and doing and experiencing when we're working collaboratively and coaching teachers. Often at Castelar, the leadership team uses questions from the progress monitoring section of the Elliott when talking to students in the classroom. And they also compare Castelar's data to that network data that I talked about earlier, and thinking about where do we need to focus our coaching efforts. And so also during the improvement days or the late starts, Castelar is looking at their coaching notes, their Elliott data, and pulling that together to drive the collaborative work that they're doing at the grade level. And so here on the right, you can see Castelar's coaching form. So they're focused on what is the instructional tasks, what are the students talking and writing about, and what are the questions that the teachers are asking. So as leaders are in classrooms taking those notes, they're also then looking at how does that fit within the Elliott to support getting better instructionally and school-wide. Here you have an example of King Science. They have been focused on teaching that includes clear examples for students, guided practice, and then independent practice with support all along the way to help students access those grade level tasks. And so as a part of our learning framework that Susan highlighted for you last year, there is a text and then associated strategies from the book Talk, Read, Talk, Write, and EL Excellence Every Day, so supporting EL learners in the classroom, and that's what King Science has been focusing on. Do students have the opportunity to have academic conversations? Are there clear writing expectations? Are we giving grade level tasks in the form of writing? And then their entire school improvement team looks at that Elliott data as they discuss next steps for professional learning. And the Elliott data at King Science is supporting individual professional growth conversations in one-on-ones with teachers.
I don't know if we're supposed to ask questions like as we go along or at the end. Okay. Can you go back to the slide we were just at? So I was kind of wondering, during these individual professional conversations, do we ever get feedback from, so obviously we're giving feedback to the teachers. Do we ever track the feedback that they give us in those conversations?
In the instructional coaching part that I'm going to talk about is as we go in and practice and go through the training, the teachers who've agreed to help us are actually giving us feedback so that we're strengthening the types of questions that we're asking. They're helping us to say, if you had approached it this way, this might have been a little bit more inviting, and helping to build that trust, because we're going into schools of teachers we might not know. And so they're giving us honest feedback on how that felt for them, what would have been more beneficial for them. Maybe these types of questions would have been more helpful too. And so yes, their feedback is also essential in helping us grow in creating that culture for learning.
Thank you.
As I shared earlier, each school has been asked to do at least 2 Elliots per year for each teacher. And at Lewis and Clark, they have, they're working on quarterly Elliots for all teachers. During the first quarter, they collectively saw the need for improvement in their high expectations and active learning domain, and they really wanted as a school to be focused on student engagement. And so they have decided to do these each quarter for all teachers, so they have several more measurements to progress monitor over the year. And the principal and the school improvement team shared these questions that are really guiding their improvement work this year. Are we making progress by using the Talk, Read, Talk, Write literacy strategy? So again, you can see that continuity with what King Science is doing at the middle level, bringing in the learning framework strategies into all classrooms. Our student engagement strategies we cover in our professional learning, leading to more active learning. So are we seeing an improvement in those metrics from quarter to quarter as we incorporate these engagement strategies in our classroom? And then ultimately, of course, will our winter map scores, and again, our Q2 Elliott visits show any sort of corresponding growth? And so this is just another example of how schools are using this data to ensure that they're improving experiences that students are having in the classroom.
Ms. Kramer, can you speak a little bit? These seem like very robust uses of the Elliott, and the schools have chosen things to focus on that are clearly driven by the data and what they see as room for improvement for their school. They've got good questions or strategies around how to guide that work. Can you speak a little bit to how, for buildings or principals that are less comfortable with that, how we might be guiding them through that process?
Absolutely, and we're going to share a little bit more about that here within our instructional rounds portion. But throughout our principal meetings this year, we're providing professional learning around how we should be collecting classroom evidence of effectiveness in the classroom and using those measurements strategically in our school improvement plans. The meetings that principals are having, that learning is mirrored in our secondary improvement instructional leadership network and in our elementary instructional leadership network. So we're trying to have that through line all the way through, and these stories that I'm sharing here, and then we'll share something at the end with Adams, we're also starting to get traction with principals sharing their own improvement stories, school leadership teams sharing their own improvement stories at those professional learning opportunities.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have a question before moving on. So for our schools that we designate as like needs improvement, do we do more Elliott observations with them per quarter or per year?
Right now, we're starting with everyone is getting 2, and then there are some additional supports that those schools are getting. Right now, it's more centered around additional professional learning, leadership coaching, supports of that nature. And then based on what the data is telling us, then we're supporting principals and taking the right next step, but not necessarily saying at all schools with this designation, you have to do 10, because we know the improvement stuck point that they're at could be a function of engagement. It could be a function of attendance. It could be a function of needing more support in implementing their curriculum. So we work really hard to get to those root causes, school by school, and with those teams to take the right next step with them.
Thank you.
If I have an Elliott question, again, would you like me to ask it now? Or would you like me to wait till you're, either way is fine with me.
Or yes, perfect. Go right ahead.
Wait or now? Okay. The chart that showed all of the different data for elementary, it was slide, whatever. You don't have to go back to it, but for you guys, it was slide 7, the one that showed, yeah, that averages. I'm assuming, so all you have to do is nod and say, yes, Jane, you're right. When in doubt, that should be your answer. But I'm assuming that since you can collect this data for elementary, middle, blah, 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 that each school is using this data to assess its own teaching and maybe kind of talking about what Ms. Full was just saying. It's not the fact that it's a needs improvement school, but presumably if a school is seeing a lot of ones in their own school, then they might do more observations or kick something into gear, whatever.
Yes, absolutely. And we know a school can be high performing and have low engagement as well. And so it's really important that our school teams have the capacity to look at a variety of points of data to get to understanding about what they need to do next in that plan, do, check, act cycle. And I think an interesting outcome of this has been, if as we look at our MAP growth data or we look at our state accountability data and we see, oh, our students are not growing at a very great rate, but then as we look at our Elliott's, we're scoring ourselves a 3, that there's this great evidence of high expectations around the task and engagement, maybe we need to step back, recalibrate, and look at what's happening, right? So it really is an important function of helping us get to the root cause of what's going on and calibrate around what is quality, and if we truly are doing these things, why aren't we seeing the growth and outcomes that we should?
So that kind of brings me to my next question, which is each school is looking at its own data, but you guys are looking at all of the schools. So if you see a school that's consistently in the ones compared to a school that's consistently in the high threes, what do you do about that?
So there's several things. Since we're in, I would say, the first year and a half of implementation, there's some calibration to be done, right? Maybe the school that's all ones, it could well be that they're scoring themselves too low, but a school, I think, in all fours, we clearly are overestimating, right, what's happening. And so, yes, so we're supporting principals and their school improvement teams around calibration. Principal supervisors are coaching principals, and we're also using this data to plan our district-wide professional learning moving forward. So really trying to get that alignment. So for February 14th, our professional learning for the district is going to be aligned to what we're seeing in terms of needs around engagement and literacy.
Okay, so I guess my question is a little bit more specific than that. Let's assume everybody's doing their observations and they're scoring roughly the same so that we can count on these numbers. If you see a school that is in the ones and another school that's in the fours, what additional supports do we send to the school that's in the ones? I mean, now that you know there's an engagement problem, so to speak.
So we are working on having consistent networks of principals too, so that principals can learn from one another. So for example, a school that's in the ones and also alongside other points of data are not moving in the direction, then we can also point to a school that has done that thing well so that they can learn from one another in principal PLCs and so forth. And in January, we're going to share with you at a board workshop another kind of layer of check-in that we've been doing called ESTs and SSTs, which is elementary support team, secondary support team, where a team of folks with the principal supervisor and the principal are sort of checking on the implementation of that school improvement plan, and TLCs and folks from Lisa's department are joining those teams also so that we get kind of that 360-degree view of support around what do we need next. So both connecting leaders and leadership teams, ensuring that we have aligned professional learning if we need some additional professional learning for those teachers, and then also connecting them to district office resources that they might need.
A little bit of a spoiler alert, this is my last comment. I really enjoyed watching the board meeting on the stream the other day, and Suzanne and I already talked about this, but one of the things that we've had a workshop on and that the presentation on Wednesday included was the just-in-time data and improvement 360, which covers attendance, behavior, and on-track information, so everybody can. Now, the heading also identified engagement, so my question to Suzanne earlier this evening was, is this the engagement that someday when all the pieces stop moving around so much, but the theory is that the just-in-time data will also include some of this engagement data once it's reliable data and we figure out how to plug it in. And I know there's a whole lot of things that Casey has to figure out before then, but that will be a fourth piece in this, is that right?
Yes, and to be clear, schools can access that data, this cognitive data.
It's just not part of
right, it's not a part of that dashboard, but they can see it the second that it goes into the system and pull a report. But that ability to see it as part of those other metrics, we have to get a usable data file and all of those things that you're discussing.
Got it, good job.
I'm wondering, have you noticed that every now and then you have a certain class, let's assume you have one of every grade level. You have that certain class that has many, many problems and they are not doing what you want them to do. I hope that you can tell us that, yeah, that does occur sometimes. and that we all have to do our best with what we're doing there. You can team up all you want to, but somehow there's a lot of other things there. And I hope there's plenty of resource and all that sort of thing to support and help that group. Because sometimes there's a group, and then you get another group that, my heavens, it's so good you just want to shout about it. You know, no trouble at all, just keep going. Yeah, I just wanted to know. Thank you.
So another important process that we're working toward is instructional rounds in OPS. And while the Elliott is a process that measures engagement, we've also been working with our schools to develop problems of practice around where they're sort of stuck in their school improvement efforts. And so instructional rounds is a process where school teams, networks, including teachers, and hopefully we get to a point where teachers in their teams are developing their own problem of practice. That would be the ideal where we're headed. Now we have teams at schools that are developing problems of practice around where they're stuck, and then going into one another's classroom, taking data on what they're seeing in terms of the task, the teaching, what the students are doing, what the teacher is doing, and then planning a right next step. And so we wanted to share a little bit about where we are in that instructional rounding work this evening before we move on to instructional coaching. So we've put this together. It's really important to understand what rounding is and what it isn't. Rounding is really a strategy for improvement that builds collaboration among teachers around improving their own practice. So it's not a program, an event. We're not evaluating folks with it. It's not an implementation, check, or training. What we're really trying to create here in our schools, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at Benson and South, but we're trying to create communities of practice around instructional improvement where we're using all this data, the attendance, engagement, behavior, and on track to determine where we're stuck, and then bring teachers together to collaboratively work on what are we seeing, and let's get better together. And so we're starting with that. We're starting with 2 schools, and we're building some capacity with our principals to start that work. And so we just wanted to give you an understanding about what it is and what it isn't, and then kind of share with you what we think this can do as an improvement process. And so many of you may have heard of rounds from a healthcare setting, right? So doctors, nurses might do rounding to understand a patient experience or a particular practice, and are we doing these things that we said we would do as a system in the healthcare setting, something like Grey's Anatomy, right, if you can imagine. And so sort of translate that understanding from a healthcare setting into the classroom. And so right now we've brought together about 60 teachers from Benson and South who are going to be part of this instructional rounds work with Harvard. And those teachers at Benson and South have developed a problem of practice for Benson and a problem of practice for South. And they've been learning a lot about the instructional core, which is that task, and the students and the teachers, what is that thing that we're asking kids to do in the classroom? And then they're going into one another's classrooms at Benson and South, collaborating together, and then planning what the next right step is. And so the idea here is, if we have this shared vision of teaching and learning, a vision of a learning culture, really focus on that expectation, what we're asking students to do, and recognize where we're stuck, then we can improve instruction and we can improve student learning. And so the focus here is really on process that is getting at changes in instruction and changes at the student experience based on some of this data that we're talking about. And so here, this is a picture of the Benson High Library on the District Improvement Day, or I'm sorry, the District Professional Learning Day in October. And you can see those 60 teachers from Benson and South coming together, engaging in dialogue and professional learning. And then shortly thereafter, all of them went to South High and went into classrooms to look at that stuck point or that problem of practice that South High had developed with their teachers to determine what the next level of work should be. And so the questions that teachers are learning to ask and engage in is, where are we stuck? What are we asking students to do in the classroom? How does this align with the other data like the Elliott, attendance, behavior on track? What are the root causes of this that don't include necessarily external things? It's about our own practice and what are we doing within our locus of control, and what should we try next? And then let's try that thing together, and then we round again. And so we're excited about bringing those two high schools together around instruction, and we hope that this process becomes part of the business of the way we do improvement, really centering classroom instruction and teacher voice as leaders in instructional improvement. And so in addition to South and Benson, we are also working with our principals through their principal professional learning. This year, they've had professional learning around identifying a problem of practice based on data, what it means to really observe a task in the classroom, which gets at that high expectations domain of the Elliott, and then analyze patterns and trends. What are we seeing in terms of the teaching, the learning, the engagement, attendance, behavior, all of those things across our classrooms? And then we're working across next year. So then how do we plan the next level of work? And how do we bring this process of instructional rounds, spread it from Benson and South to our other schools? And so while Benson and South are leading the way, we hope that this process will become, again, the way that we're doing improvement work across our district as we move into next year. And with that, Susan will talk a little bit about how we're supporting schools with instructional coaching.
Good evening. Our third type of classroom visit we are exploring tonight is instructional coaching. Instructional coaching affords instructional leaders to gain insight to know if the professional learning that they have delivered is actually translating to shifts in the classroom. It also engages teachers in reflection on their practice with some descriptive feedback. Instructional coaching supports the deepening of content and instructional knowledge while helping us to foster a strong learning culture. This is really an outline of what it is and what it is not. Instructional coaching has been around and a part of our district for a while, but we continue to hone and practice our skills so that we can continually get better at it as leaders. Instructional coaching is based on that mutual trust. As the teacher and instructional leader, they're working together collaboratively to focus in on, I as a teacher have decided, I understand the problem of practice. I understand what we're working on for our whole school as a part of the school improvement process. This is what I know I need to get better at in order to help move the needle. And this is what I'm focusing in on. And so our instructional coaching practices are able to have deeper conversations more individually about that. We provide instructional coaching training. This year we're doing it at one time, and it's coming up in January. So our staff is getting ready to sign up. So it includes all principals, all instructional leaders at elementary and our secondary level. And this is a time that we set aside that the leaders are really going to be learning from one another. And during that time, the training focuses in, the content is really focused in on what are we trying to implement as a district. And so our K-2 leaders are going to be really focusing in on honing their instructional coaching skills on supporting the implementation of structured literacy. So they're actually going to be going into schools and practicing and being in a classroom that's doing structured literacy, where the teachers, or the leaders are going to have a chance to calibrate together on what it is they're seeing and being able to provide feedback to the teacher, and then the teacher will provide feedback to the leaders on how well that was beneficial to them, yes or no. and of course deeper than that. And then our third grade, our grades 3 through 12, are going to focus on strategies about constructing arguments using complex text. And we will be going inside ELA classrooms, and social studies classrooms will be the experiences that they will be doing, especially at the secondary level. So the week of January 13th, that week, all instructional leaders are participating. These are all the schools that we are going to be in those next few days. And during that time, as we are practicing our skills, before we even go into the classroom, we actually level set what are our norms for going in and visiting the classrooms, because we're not about being in there and being disruptive. We're going in there to actually collect what we call low inference notes, or notes of what it is that we're actually seeing and observing while we're in the visit. Teachers are all volunteers. The principal asks, we have a group of leaders coming in who want to learn and be a part of your classroom. And so they provide us names of the teachers who are willing to do that. And so we have the learning session, so our staff will spend time going over and making sure everybody's on the same page of understanding structured literacy and also complex text, kind of level setting all the content. And then we actually go into the classrooms for about 15 to 20 minutes. We have a note taker that they'll practice taking the notes on. And then they actually, as leaders, they go out, and as Suzanne talked about, calibration. What did we see? Because we want to make sure that everybody, in a sense, is seeing the same things, or what might have been more obvious to you than what I caught, because we want to make sure that people are really understanding the entire experience of what they observed. And then they come up with some questions. How do you kind of start this dialogue? How do you approach to help a reflective conversation occur? And then they will go in and they have someone covers the class so that the teacher can come out and give them feedback. They actually practice the conversation, and then we ask the teacher to give feedback to us on how well we did, what might have been more helpful to them, as we talked a little bit about earlier. These visits help us to really see the larger picture of what's happening instructionally. Are there some common things that some teachers are focused in on, that we might be able to see some common trends, that we might need to be adjusting some professional learning upcoming, and we want to make sure that it's tailored to help support the teacher and what it is, the growth they're wanting to see happen for themselves. And Suzanne's actually going to share with you how Adams Elementary is utilizing their coaching visits. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to know, was there any rhyme or reason for those schools that we chose to go into?
We ask. We were in different schools last year. The year before that, we were in different schools. We're really just trying to make sure that we are hitting as many schools and making sure that everyone is a part of that culture for learning. And it was just opening up to see who might be interested in helping to host. Because we do want to make sure it's a cross experience across the district. Or Suzanne?
I know that you had several pages that said, this is not judging, this is not evaluative, this is not. I'm sure it still feels that way to teachers. How do you compensate for that? How do you help? I mean, assuming all teachers, in fact, want to be better teachers, how do you nonetheless give them where's the positive reinforcement that happens in the rounds or in the instructional coaching to help them not dread people showing up to take these notes, but to, feel good about what they're doing?
I think that all conversations are focused in the positive and setting those expectations, but it really comes down ultimately about building the trust, right? So as I'm going in, it's not just what I've done that day for instructional coaching. I, as a leader, how am I setting a culture of learning where it's safe for everyone to know that I'm giving my absolute best today. This is the lesson I'm delivering. Here's what we're doing on structured literacy. And opening ourselves up to be vulnerable, because principals don't have all the answers also. I've also learned as I was doing instructional coaching, I was having a conversation with Mrs. Kratke. I know I was also going to be learning a lot from her as an educator. And it's really about how are we creating those conversations that it's more reciprocal, that we're really learning from one another and not going in, and as that one slide said, about judging or fixing it, because I think we always talk about being curious before critical. So before we ask those questions, thinking about how we're approaching the conversation so that it opens it up for an actual dialogue versus a situation.
Thank you, because I want this to be as productive as possible, but all of us that have been in the classroom as teachers know it's very easy to get defensive about what you're doing. So I'm glad you have anticipated how to help the teachers buy in and feel supported as opposed to judged. So
The questions that we ask are really important to not set it off in a judgment fashion.
And I would add with rounding, I participated in rounding as a teacher, and as those first two schools with Benson and South, it's teachers in one another's classroom with that intention of that collectively developed problem of practice. And so then that is an important piece as well, because we're agreeing and together we're focusing on some place where we're stuck, and then we're in one another's classroom. And so that creates sort of a culture of safety as well, and sort of teacher leadership and that sort of thing.
And the work we mentioned Bailey Group on that board presentation, whenever that was that just last week? There's also, these are willing teachers, so they've put themselves out to be part of this. And same with that, I think that picture on slide 14 of the Benson and South staff, I mean, it seems uneventful, but these are people that are willing to take this on. These are teachers that want the input, and we found in some cases that more teachers, they realize these things are going, they're volunteering to be a part of it.
Ms. Grimmer, you might have just answered this question, but I know the principals were mentioned, but when we talk about instructional leaders, teachers, who else are we talking about? Like functionally, what kind of staff are we talking about?
So on with instructional rounds and kind of the groundwork that we're laying for those practices, principals and elementary instructional leaders like IFs, assistant principals, and so forth are getting some of that, as well as part of they have meetings that mirror what principals are getting often, and then with the instructional coaching work that we're collaborating on in January, members of the instructional leadership team will be a part of that coaching effort. So we're trying to ensure that we're getting key messages across a variety of role groups.
And then if you could go to slide 18, the kind of two focuses that you have there for K2 and then 3 through 12. Can you talk a little bit about exactly how those were chosen? Is this step one of a plan, or is this we've found that we want to focus on this and then we'll evaluate, iterate, and do something else for the next year?
So last year, as we were thinking through both near and long-term planning, and then this year as we move forward with our moonshot, we're really trying to be strategic about what we're focusing on. This is also based on our data, what we're seeing in classrooms, and will really be important foundationally for our moonshot. We know that students have to decode, read fluently, and we know that virtually all performances within the standards after third grade are based on the ability to make arguments around text regardless of the content area. And so really focusing on literacy as that core component and engagement in that across content areas, we think is a strategic foundation for where we need to head with our moonshot of all students reading on grade level. So we wanted to, we shared some examples from Castelar, King Science, around specifically Elliott data, but I wanted to share an example of a school that's really bringing this work all together. And so last year and then this year, again, we've been really focused with our leaders and leadership teams on how we're using data and data in terms of evidence from the classroom to drive improvement. So we may look at a 360 dashboard or look at attendance data, but if we're not able to bring those metrics together, understand the intersection, and really get to the core of the work, which is what is happening instructionally, we're not going to see the school improvement gains that we need to see. And so at Adams Elementary, their team has really pulled all of this work together into really coherent school improvement work. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit of their journey that Principal Bakit shared with our principals last week at the principal meeting, yes. And so here you have Adams, their school improvement team, said, well, where are we stuck? Where are we not seeing movement in our school improvement plan? And so here you see on the left their problem of practice. Even though a recent academic diagnostic revealed strong instruction and grade appropriate assignments, not all students are deeply engaged during grade level instruction. And so the team at Adams, after looking at their data across a variety of measures, realized we need to work on engagement. And so their team developed this theory of action. Basically, if we do these things, then this is what we should see in the classroom, and this is what we should see in terms of outcomes. And so this is really our school improvement processes living in an elementary school. And so here's their theory of action to address this problem. Leadership teams will co-teach, coach, and facilitate shared learning during PLCs so that teachers will be able to include intentional checks for understanding that 100% of students are engaged in, right? So that students can have multiple opportunities to add, justify, revise, and so forth. And so they went from problem of practice to here's our theory. This is the idea that we want to implement and measure. And so then they decided as teams, they're going to go into classrooms, and remembering that Susan said we had established those classroom observation norms where we're going into classrooms, we need to make sure as administrators we don't have our radios on, we're being interactive, we're softly checking in with the students in a way that doesn't interrupt the teacher, right? And so at Adams, they reiterated those observation norms. They're going into classrooms and they're taking notes around what they're seeing in terms of the students responding to a grade level task, their problem of practice. Then, all of those notes that they've been taking, the Elliott data they've been collecting, and other points of data, they're debriefing. And so they're taking those notes and they're saying, here are the really important things we all noticed relative to our problem of practice. And then they're putting those in categories. You can kind of see their work up here. Like, what did they see in math? What are they seeing relative to the task in math? And so they're categorizing all of those things and talking through how those are related, and then thinking about what are the students experiencing? If these things are true across all of our classrooms, what can we predict that students will learn? So at Adams, if there's theory of action is sort of coming true, if they're seeing that, wow, most of our students have an opportunity to respond to this grade level task, and here's what we're seeing in terms of patterns, we would predict then we would see an uptick in student performance. What they also might find is that, well, it really isn't a grade level assignment that they're getting, right? So then we might predict that they wouldn't, right? And so that's the work that the teams are going through, looking at all of those notes and thinking about what do we need to do next based on the real work that's happening in the classroom. And so they also then layer on additional points of data from coaching, from the dashboards, and they think about at Adams, how should this impact our professional learning with our teachers? How should this tell us more about what we should be coaching on and who we should be coaching with? What do we need to understand more deeply about what's going on in our classrooms? And so you can see all of this work that we've been sort of talking about in terms of improvement processes really coming together and living with the school improvement team at Adams. And I just wanted to highlight for you all their ELA proficiency. So you can see 21 and 22, very steady increases. Last year was really when this work started to take root and take hold at Adams. And you can see that nearly 20% increase between 2021 and 2024 with this approach, evidence-based approach with teachers as collaborators in these processes for school improvement. So we just wanted to highlight Principal Bakit and her team and the amazing work that they're doing at that school that's really led to some really good growth in terms of reading our ELA proficiency at that school. So in closing, we know that in order to reach our goals for improvement, to reach improved outcomes related to the metrics that we shared with you in the last information item at the last board meeting, that we have to have purposeful engagement in the classroom, and that the evidence of what's happening in the classroom is guiding our improvement efforts. We know that evidence from this work that principals and teams are tracking and uploading in their school improvement toolkits will support our systems accreditation efforts and continuous improvement efforts in April. Our January instructional coaching, professional learning, and our February 14th District Professional Learning Day are responsive to engagement data. We continue to be committed to continuous improvement, and we know that teachers are important difference makers and improvement leaders in our school district.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions, colleagues?
I've got one.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Ms. Holt.
I'm throwing it back from like to the very beginning, but this is just a question that I didn't get to ask, and it's about the digital learning with the Elliott. I wondered, we've been talking about screen time for a while, and I'm wondering how do I want to structure this question? I guess, you know, when we talk about screen time with children, your doctor tells your child that, you know, they should only have so much screen time a day, even if it's educational screen time. And so I'm wondering, have we kind of reached that sweet spot with screen time with our kids, and, you know, they're when learning with their iPads every single day, and how does that factor into Elliott observations?
We're actually taking a deeper look at that right now, and we're going to be providing some guidance beginning in January.
Okay.
And really focusing in on, and I believe you guys have a copy of the Elliott tool in front of you, and how technology is a tool to be used in the classroom. And that's really what it is for, is how are we creating, how is it enhancing the learning experience? It's not been designated, nor should it be designated as a time to just sit over to the side and do whatever it is that has been asked without purpose. And so we're working on providing some guidance that will be coming out in January, because we want to make sure that what we're expecting to have happen with the digital tools is in alignment to what we're expecting from the standards as well, or the Elliott engagement.
Okay. So you think those changes that or that guidance that we're going to get is going to improve those Elliott scores?
It will also require us to be thinking about how are we also modeling that through some professional learning, because the guidance will be one part of it to help provide some clarity about what the expectations are. And then we'll also be needing to do some collaborative efforts in providing some professional learning so that teachers can continue to hone and get better at the skills that are there.
Okay, thank you.
I think not just teachers, I think everybody, on how we're utilizing technology better.
Keelan?
Thank you. So I was noting on the slide about Adams, the labeling of the theory of action. That's a framework. And I guess the first question I have is, I'm wondering if that is something that we provided, or if that is something that, okay, so that I think that's just one more example of my overall comment, which is that it's impressive how much work has actually been done in the last year and a half, 2 years, towards what is really an ambitious school improvement effort. So thank you. It really is impressive how much has already been done. These are obviously standardized and research-based, and we have an understanding of how to do what we want to do, and we are taking action. So I appreciate the efforts. Thank you.
Ms. Erdenberg?
Thank you. This is another opportunity to say, yes, you're right, Ms. Erdenberger. But there's a huge, in my experience, a huge difference between elementary schools and high schools. And your experience at Adams, I can just imagine, a relatively small team of the educational staff really buying in and really wanting to do this and work together. And, that's just the nature, in my experience, of elementary schools. As we all know, high schools tend to be a lot more segmented, not just by department, but also by, I'm going to be a little bit stereotypical and say some people are coaches and some people are not. But there's a lot of other dynamics involved in the high school. And I'm not asking for the answer to that question, but is that something that you are building in, how you get your high school teachers to be on board as much as our enthusiastic elementary teachers?
Yes, and interestingly, when Principal Bakit shared at the principal meeting, we also had Melinda Bailey from Benson share their work around their problem of practice and their work with instructional rounds, and it's been amazing to see principals learning from one another regardless of level. And so there were several middle school principals when Principal Bakit was talking, taking vociferous notes about what they were seeing. Some of them are going to go to Adams, and they're thinking about structures. And while I think the segmentation point that you make, it's so important, and also some of our secondary schools have more folks on a leadership team to kind of do this work, where at an elementary school, it might just be the principal or the assistant principal, and the instructional facilitator. And so we're also working with our secondary teams and leaders to really, it's really about getting that leadership team all driving and moving in the same direction with really clear systems. And so I think that's what we're working on now with secondary schools, is how are you getting this improvement team to lead in this way? How are you creating systems of doing this, creating that calibration? And truly, our middle school and secondary principals are also taking a lot away from what our elementary school principals are doing, and we're creating those improvement stories across levels to have those opportunities to learn from one another. Thanks.
Any other questions before we close out, colleagues? I just wanted to echo Mr. Thielen's comments real quick before I turn it over to Mr. Ray. Now, it's been really exciting, really encouraging to watch both your work over the past few years here and see the impact that you're already starting to have on our schools for our students, and really starting to turn around a lot of the academic numbers that we were seeing, especially during the COVID slide. So excited to continue watching where you take us. So thank you, Mr. Ray.
I also want to mention that when we took this journey together last year as an intern, we tried to match the workshops to what principals were learning. So we were bringing you along. And so this information is timely to what our principal meetings are, our leadership meetings are. This is off a little bit because that was my fault, because I missed one workshop. But as we move, we will be planning for the 25-26 school year in a matter of months. And so if there's something else, or you want to go in a different direction, or you want more on a specific topic, keep that in mind and let us know too, because my initial plan right now is to bring you along next year. But if there's something else that you want us to hit, don't hesitate to let me know as well, because we will be planning very shortly for those workshops for the next school year. And I want to thank the team too. This has been a lot of work. Thank the teachers that have volunteered to have this, and of course the principals throughout the district that have worked very hard on these processes.
All right, thank you. Anything else before we close? All right, let the record reflect that the board workshop adjourned at 7:05 p.m.